Over 20 years later, games like Viewtiful Joe continue to show some of the strongest game design we've ever seen. Viewtiful Joe was released back in 2003 for the GameCube, and a PS2 version was released the following year. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up directed by Hideki Kamiya back during his Capcom days. With unique combat and an art style that's aged like fine wine, one of the strongest aspects of Viewtiful Joe is how it reminds you what it truly feels to be challenged. Viewtiful Joe is a game built upon varying levels of execution that requires you to use all the tools at your disposal to succeed. This can only be achieved by the game constantly forcing you out of your comfort zone and making you learn something new each time. It doesn't teach you through little slaps on the wrist, but through the bitter harshness of trying again and again and again. Be too stubborn to adapt, and you'll be doomed to an endless cycle of game overs.
Ow! Cut!
Viewtiful Joe's main gimmick is controlling the game through special effects, those being slowdown, Mach speed, and zoom in. Each of these have their own unique properties that affect Joe, enemies, and the environment in different ways and can be combined together to create solutions to problems. This idea of layers upon layers forces you to think about situations in new ways. Should this problem be handled neutrally, or maybe with a slowdown? Maybe I can solve it with just a zoom in. Maybe a slowdown into a zoom in. Maybe a slowdown into a Mach speed into a slowdown zoom in. All these abilities complement each other and can all be activated simultaneously. If controlling all these effects at the same time while controlling Joe and fighting and dodging enemies sounds tough, that's because it is. Viewtiful Joe isn't a technically complicated game, but has a massive hurdle for execution. It's not hard because there's a ton of buttons to remember or combos to learn. It's hard because of all the layers you're controlling at the same time. There's a lot of genius design in these systems because you can tell straight from the get-go that using these powers makes you extremely overpowered and allows you to clear out waves of enemies with ease. The struggle comes from just that though, learning to control everything while controlling Joe. This means that almost every hit you take is your fault. You didn't die because the game threw a billion enemies on screen with no way to deal with them. You died because you weren't efficiently using the effects or managing your meter. Anytime you get hurt or killed, it's almost always immediately apparent what mistake you made that led to that result and what you could have done differently. This degree of challenge is important because it's what holds everything together. If a game allows you to get by with ignoring the core systems, then what's even the point? If the easy solution gives the same result as the difficult one, then there's no real reason to engage with the harder option. This is why challenge is important, because it forces you to learn what the game was designed for, and you're only going to learn through practice, and your progress will be halted until you're sufficiently practiced enough to move on and you're ready to learn something new. Challenge is the framework that allows the game to be experienced the way it was intended and forces the player to engage in the way it was always designed to be. No one is holding you back but yourself. This design philosophy is starting to feel lost today, as games are being made more and more accessible to players of all skill levels, including those who refuse to spend the time to learn. Because of this, studios tend to design their games around very easy-to-learn ideas, and this, in my opinion, greatly limits the things you're able to do, out of fear that the game will make people give up on learning something new and difficult. Learning is a fun and rewarding experience. It can just be frustrating at times. It's no secret that games have gotten much easier over the years. Some of this is in part due to just more quality of life changes like autosaves, frequent checkpoints, and more readily available on-demand information. But I still think that the skill that a game expects out of you and your performance is drastically lower than it used to be. There has been a huge mentality shift over the years where now a person very rarely considers if a game will be too hard for them. There are exceptions to this rule for sure, like FromSoft's games or maybe even something like Darkest Dungeon, but generally speaking, even the most casual players often don't even consider the thought of a game requiring more out of them than they're willing to give, which unfortunately in some cases is very little.
During SpongeBob's wind-up animation for bowling, he walks forward. That means you fall off of the button, which closes the gate and prevents you from bowling the bubble where you intended, when you intended.
Viewtiful Joe harkens back to the design of making something tough as nails that not everyone is going to be able to finish. It requires complete focus and concentration and moves at a pace that will leave some people behind. It's a risky design decision for sure, but in doing this it allows the game's systems to fully flourish, and it makes it one of the most enjoyable and rewarding games to learn and get good at. It's not hard for the sake of just being hard, and it's a challenge I haven't felt since playing Ninja Gaiden Black. Man, that was a good game. The difficulty is a constant upward trend where every level somehow manages to get more and more difficult than the last, and it tests your abilities in new ways by constantly introducing new enemies all the way up to the last level and putting you into increasingly punishing situations. The challenge isn't over once the game is complete though. Each new difficulty finds a new and fair way to challenge your mettle even more. Harder difficulties, in addition to higher enemy health pools and more damage, have remixed enemy layouts to be more demanding of your abilities, as well as enemies having less wind up on attacks, making them faster and more aggressive. Even at its hardest on Ultra V rated, Viewtiful Joe rarely feels unfair. When you die, you immediately realize what wrong choice you made and what different action you could have done to avoid that outcome.
Cut!
Let's take a look at this example. At first glance, it looks like a cheap death. It may not even be noticeable at first what happened. These enemies are Bazooka Cromarties. Their bazooka is devastating, and they frequently fire them and shoot in a straight horizontal line. You can't visibly see the rocket unless time is slowed down, meaning that anytime they fire, unless time is slowed, you can basically draw an invisible line of death across the screen. I made the mistake of leaving this Bazooka Cromartie unattended. I should have known full well that a rocket was coming off screen. Looking back, the best option would have been to slow down time in anticipation and dodged it, but let's say I couldn't do that. Maybe I was out of meter. I could have jumped and prolonged myself in midair with the combo, waiting for the sound cue of the fire and then dropped to safety after. These are two different actions from the top of my head that I could have done to avoid getting killed here. It's a true testament to how well designed the game is, and that even in the most chaotic situations, it's always apparent what you could have done differently. The challenge is also more than just tons of things happening really fast. It's a test on how well you can think in layers and use the 3 different video effects to your advantage. You start out only using one at a time, but as you get better, you'll begin using several at once. Like with these Gelbies, you have to hit their backside to deal damage. In order to kill them in one cycle before they turn around on V rated and above, you use slow down and zoom in for maximum damage. After 2 hits, you zoom out and use Mach speed and slow down together to quickly close the gap. Then you zoom in again and finish them off. It's these different layers that build on top of each other that makes Viewtiful Joe so satisfying to learn. You even start to learn cool tricks like throwing boomerangs and slowing down for more damage. And then you learn that if you zoom in, they also get a damage increase. Then you put 2 and 2 together and you combine these 2 effects for a devastating combo. Again, layers. Only using one at a time is fine on your first playthrough, but on the higher difficulties, it will require you to use them simultaneously, which is why I think Viewtiful Joe is at its best on Ultra V rated. Everything up to that point has been training you to engage with every one of its systems and get you to a certain level of proficiency with them, all the way to the point where you don't even need skull markers anymore to tell if an enemy will attack high or low. No enemy in the game though is a bigger hurdle than the Cromarties. If you've played Viewtiful Joe, then you know. These things are straight from hell. They will kill you more than anything else, mark my words. They are pretty much just upgraded versions of the basic Bianchis, but they will truly test your ability to adapt. First off, unlike most enemies, they can't reasonably be stun locked. After a few hits, they'll automatically break out of your combo. If you've played Kingdom Hearts 2, it's kind of like revenge value. You can cheese this with boomerangs to infinite them, but this doesn't grant you any V points for your ranking. That may not matter to some, but let's just assume that we don't have any boomerangs. The only way to reasonably kill Cromarties is to dizzy them, which we do by dodging their attacks. Seems easy enough. The regular Bianchis attack either high or low and will be dizzied after a single dodge. Cromarties are a little bit different though. I'll try to explain this in the easiest way I can, so if you haven't played Viewtiful Joe, just try to follow along. Instead of having just one hit, they have a 4-hit combo, and all 4 hits need to be dodged in order to dizzy them. The first 2 hits are easy enough if you have skull markers on, but the last 2 won't have any. So how do you figure them out? The order of their first 2 hits determine the order of the last 2, giving them 4 possible attack patterns. Up, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up. After this, they'll be dizzied and allow you to not only deal extreme damage to them, but also deal increased damage to all other enemies, including other Cromarties, until your combo ends. This is taken up a notch on Ultra V rated, where we have no skull markers. If we watch closely, he telegraphs if he's going to attack high or low. He'll weave his fists around if it's high, and shuffle his feet if it's low. But what about the second hit? Well, it's completely random and there's no tell for it, but there is a way around it. After the first hit, you slow down to see the direction of the next hit and react to it. This is a super valuable skill that has to be learned. Being able to use slow down right before an attack hits and reacting to it is an essential skill, and this is a very cool way to teach it to you. It gives you plenty of time to practice before making it to one of the bosses where it is absolutely necessary. Viewtiful Joe understands the importance of being challenged. It's only out of our comfort zones that we truly improve. Viewtiful Joe isn't here to give you a pat on the back and a participation trophy. It respects your abilities and it says, "I'm not going to go easy on you." Through the pain and frustration of getting stuck and replaying the same levels over and over, your skill grows considerably. Despite higher difficulties being a huge step up in challenge from the last, each playthrough I died less and less than the one before it, really cementing the fact that I was indeed getting better at the game even though it wasn't letting up. It kept finding new ways to push the struggle further and further so that you, the player, can keep improving. This is something that I think is hard to find now since too many developers are scared of frustrating their audience too much and having them quit. It's only through the insane trials this game puts you through that you're able to push your skills to the absolute limits. It's that heart-pounding, anxiety-inducing cathartic moments of both dread and excitement that makes the challenge of Viewtiful Joe so fun and engaging. It only took a 20-year-old game to remind me how great that can feel.